Good evening, everyone. Thank you. My name is Ann Colwell, and I'm the event coordinator for UMR Connects. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind everyone, next week we hit the plaza. We're going to be outside for our summer series, and we start with No Fear stage fighting with a Shakespeare group. So please join us out there. We're out on the stage right outside the Kaler Hotel. If it is inclement weather, we will move right back inside here. So please come out. It'll be a lot of fun. And after that, we did put out flyers with the rest of the June calendar on it. So please check it out. And I'm going to turn it over to Sam so she can introduce our speaker.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Samantha Ream, and thank you for coming tonight as we wrap up our May theme on conspiracy or critical connection. Just a reminder, and for those who don't know, UMR Connects is at 7 p.m. every Tuesday night. It's free and open to the public. Next month's theme will be performing live out on the Peace Plaza, as Ann said. And if you haven't already done so, please sign in to get your name into our door prize drawing. The information is only used to let you know of upcoming events, and the winner will receive a $20 gift card to the M-Gear store at the end of the night. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Dean Urdahl's latest historical fiction novel, Three Flags to Glory, follows Uprising, Retribution, Pursuit, and Conspiracy in a saga of the Dakota and Civil Wars. Urdahl's family helped settle Litchfield Township in 1856, 2 years before Minnesota became the 32nd state. The conflict started across the lake from Urdahl's home. His great-great-grandfather buried the conflict's first 5 victims. Urdahl also has written The Collar and the Gun, which captures the life history of Father John Kaiser, Touching Bases with Our Memories, a history of the Minnesota Twins, and Lives Lived Large, Minnesotans in the Public Eye. In his spare time, Urdahl enjoys reading, playing softball and basketball, and occasionally participating in Civil War reenactments. In addition to writing, Urdahl has been interested in politics and public service for most of his life. He currently is in his 7th term as a member of the Minnesota House of Representatives. Urdahl has served the District 18A west of the Twin Cities since first elected in 2002, and he currently chairs the Legacy Finance Committee in the House. Urdahl has spent more than 35 years teaching in the New London Spicer School District. In 2006, he retired from the district's middle school where he was teaching American history. Urdahl also coached multiple sports at New London Spicer, highlighted by leading the high school girls cross-country team to 3 consecutive state championships in 2000, 2001, and 2002. Please join me in welcoming Dean Urdahl.
Thank you. It sounded pretty good there, didn't I? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. You guys hear me over there? I would prefer not to use this if I don't need to. I'm using my 7th grade teaching voice. If I do wander off, just raise your hand and I'll either speak louder or I'll use this thing, okay? First of all, as Sam said, I chair the Legacy Committee. A lot of library programs, Historical Society, Outdoor Heritage, Clean Water. This is from the 3/8 of 1%. Constitutional Amendment passed in 2008, dedicated to 4 funds that I have the privilege of helping to spend in the state of Minnesota, $640 million. We ran into just a little bit of a roadblock a week ago Monday when ends of sessions get very strange. And I had my bill up 4 years ago. It came up at 6 o'clock, last bill of the day, and the other side filibustered it for 6 hours. Not because they didn't like my bill, but because they just didn't want us to pass the bill. That's when we went into special session and shut down and all that stuff. Well, we could have passed one bill. They would have voted on mine. And this time, I said, don't bring me up last again. Don't do that to me again. We were back in majority. And so all session, no, we won't. Well, they brought me up at 10:30 at night. We're done at midnight, and I'm the last bill again. I was supposed to have been up second that day, but they kept pushing me aside all night. And finally, they started a filibuster again. I don't know why, but they're just talking about nothing. This should have taken 15 minutes. And finally, at 11:45, they allowed a vote. And what happens is the jobs bill was in the Senate, and the Democrats in the House didn't want the legacy bill to pass until the jobs bill passed in the Senate. And they were filibustering the jobs bill in the Senate. It was a mess. And then finally, the jobs bill gets passed. They send it to us. We send the legacy bill over. It passed 123 to 11. But it didn't get the Senate in time for them to pass it. So, I get to do it again. Back to special session with the legacy bill. So that's just my brief little commercial message as to what it's like to be a state representative and have a bill that everybody loves and still can't pass.
What happened in the Minnesota Miracle is they used to get together as sort of first, they struggled, but somehow they compromised. What happened? Well,
123 people voted for my bill. I mean, that's both sides. A lot of the things we did were bipartisan. But anyway, that's not why you're here. It's just my quick little message. We'll get on to, yes.
what was all in your legacy bill, you curiosity?
I mean, all kinds of things.
I find it very interesting, your heirs had Minnesota, were here before we state. My great-great-grandfathers, the staff were farming down by Pleasant Grove before Minnesota was a state. And we have legacy funds going to buy some property out from us now. I sure hope that can change. And eminent domain in that part, I was a 2008 supporter. I sure hope they change that part.
The eminent domain has never been used. Legacy money has never been used for eminent domain.
Perfect. And I was a voter, I
It
supported.
has never been used for eminent domain. But we do have water projects, we have parks, we have trails.
I voted for it back
I
then.
can go on $640 million worth, but the topic at hand,
I'll talk to you after.
talk to me afterwards. I will stick around a little bit, because I brought some books with, just in case anybody wants them. So, I'm going to talk to you tonight about Abraham Lincoln and about what happened, what did happen, what may have happened, the conjectures. It's pretty agreed upon as to who killed Lincoln. So if you ask somebody who killed Abraham Lincoln, it's John Wilkes Booth. Well, it's much more to it than that. There's even a little angle that maybe he didn't. But I will tell you tonight, I will focus on what is known to have happened, which is a lot more than most of us really have contemplated or have knowledge of. So, tonight, in order to do this as quickly as I would like to, I'm not going to be able to kind of digress as I want to do it from time to time. I'm going to have to kind of stick to my notes. I will wander away occasionally, but this will help me be more timely because, frankly, when I talk about the Indian Wars, I could easily go 3 hours. And on Lincoln, I could easily go 2 hours. And I'm going to try to do it in like an hour and 15 minutes. So, with that, well, by the way, if you're interested, I'll just work. But primarily I've written because of my background, my family background, about the Indian Wars. Might as well do this now. Uprising deals with the U.S. Dakota War of 1862, tells the story pretty much of the war. Retribution deals with the captives, the trials, the executions, the hangings at Mankato. Pursuit, and I only have one copy with me, deals with going into the Dakota Territory in 1863 with Generals Sully and Sibley and hunting down the Dakota. Conspiracy, the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, that's what I'm going to be talking about tonight. And my latest book, Three Paths to Glory, which focuses on 3 regiments in the Civil War. The first 2.5 years of the war. The book I write this summer will be the rest of the war in these 3 regiments. 2 from Minnesota, the 2nd and the 5th, and the 1st Tennessee. So, with that. There have been many thoughts and theories regarding the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Among those who are considered to be possibly part of a conspiracy to kill Lincoln, the banking industry, the Rothschilds, involved because of concerns that Lincoln's post-war policies would be detrimental to them. The Catholic Church. The Vatican was the only foreign governmental body to recognize the Confederacy. And then there is the story, I'm digressing already, of Father Charles Chittaway, who was a pastor, a priest in Illinois, ran afoul of the bishop, and eventually the bishop and the priest went to court against each other. The bishop closely aligned with Jesuits who formed a large delegation in the courtroom. The lawyer hired by Charles Chittaway to defend him was a guy from Springfield named Abraham Lincoln. In the course of the trial, Lincoln dragged the Jesuits through the mud a little bit, and when it was over and Chittaway basically was absolved of the accusations against him, he turned to Lincoln and said, as the Jesuits filed past, they'll get you for this. So that gets tangled up with the legends and the myths. The other interesting thing, hopefully I'll remember at the end, is the Minnesota connection. That, I'll just tell it now so I don't forget. On April 14th, 1865, in St. Joseph, Minnesota, at about, it would be about 6 o'clock or so after the evening, several priests came into a tavern in St. Joseph, owned by a man named John Linneman. They announced to John Linneman, "Did you hear? The president was killed today." Well, Linneman was obviously very surprised and asked for details about it. The priest didn't have much to say, and Linneman thought it was probably a rumor. It couldn't have happened. Well, the fact is, it hadn't happened until about 4 hours later. The priest had just come from a trip to Washington. How did they know that Lincoln was going to be killed? They stayed at the Surratt boarding house in Washington, where John Wilkes Booth also spent some time. The Secretary of War Stanton, Vice President Johnson, and others in the government were blamed. Lincoln was already facing opposition that his Reconstruction plan was too easy on the South. There was a great cover-up in this assassination, led by Secretary of War Stanton. Booth had a diary on his body when he was shot. The diary was turned over to Stanton. When it later reappeared, 18 pages had been ripped out. What did those pages say? No one but Stanton ever knew. And I will get to the conversation likely held between Andrew Johnson and Stanton in the room next to the room in which Lincoln was dying on the night that Lincoln died, or the death watch was on that night. And so because of Stanton, because of Johnson and what happened, there thoughts that the government somehow could have been involved. And then we always have the secret society angle. The Illuminati, the One World Order, the Masons, the Knights of the Golden Circle. Now, why are they connected? Because so darn many of the people involved in this also were members of a secret society. For example, Albert Pike. Albert Pike was the head of the Illuminati in the United States. A general in the Confederate Army, directly serving under Secretary of War and State, Judah Benjamin. Pike was a Mason. And in fact, there's only one statue to a Confederate general in Washington, D.C. And that's the statue of Albert Pike, located in front of the Masonic Temple in Washington. And another angle with Albert Pike, by the way, he's a big guy, 6'4", well over 300 pounds. And Pike was also the director of covert operations for the Confederacy. In charge, one of his charges, starting Indian wars on the frontier. And in my book, Uprising, I do play the angle there that a Confederate officer was seen in Little Crow's camp. And with that angle, I make my main character a Confederate agent sent to Minnesota to start the war. Did that happen? We'll never know. Sure, probably not, but we'll never know. And then when I hear that Albert Pike had that as a charge of his duty, it makes me wonder even more. But that's something that we'll never prove. So, those are some of the groups thought to possibly be involved. But I won't guarantee that any of them were. What I'm going to talk to you about are the two known groups who can be proven to have been involved. One out of Halifax and one out of Richmond. It will come to those. So putting all those aside that I just mentioned, there were two plots documented and verified that I'm going to discuss. Early in the war, a signal corps was established by the Confederate States of America. Oh, somebody's calling me. Who doesn't know that I'm speaking here tonight? Just in case it's the speaker here. Hello. I'm doing fine, but I'm busy right now. I'll call you later. I believe that was the Speaker of the House. But I couldn't say who the heck are you. Okay. Early in the war, a signal corps was established by the Confederates to transmit messages between Richmond and Halifax, to secretly transmit messages. Late in 1861, a clandestine Confederate base was set up in Halifax, Canada. On March 2nd, 1864, Captain Ulrich Dahlgren, a Union officer, led a raid into Virginia aimed to free Union prisoners. The raid was bungled. Dahlgren was killed, and a note found on his body that read in part, "Once in the city, it must be destroyed, and Jeff Davis and his cabinet killed." Later, there will be accusations that the note was a fabrication, but it was widely distributed in the South and inflamed passion against Yankee assassins. After the Dahlgren affair, two plans developed to kill Lincoln and hold him for ransom in return for Confederate prisoners held in Union prisons. Grant had suspended prisoner exchanges. You see, for much of the war, prisoners were exchanged, north and south. But as the war wore on, Grant realized that was to the South's benefit, because they didn't have men to spare. The North could keep bringing them in. I mean, Northern men were hiring others to go fight for them. And so there's a surplus of men in the North. But in the South, when you took a soldier and put him in prison, he couldn't be replaced. And so it was a real problem. And Grant saw that, and he said, we have Union soldiers suffering horribly at Andersonville in Georgia. But in the long run, for others to come, it will be better if we leave them in Andersonville and don't exchange them for Southern soldiers, because if we keep doing that, we will prolong the war. So he had suspended the exchange. And so to get soldiers, the South believed it had to have a prisoner so valuable that they would trade for that prisoner. And that prisoner was Abraham Lincoln. That was the goal, to take Lincoln prisoner and trade him for Southern troops held in Union prison of war camps. The first plan, Thomas Nelson Conrad. That's not him. Thomas Nelson Conrad, a 3rd Virginia Cavalry Scout, was recruited to lead an attempt to kidnap the president. On August 9, 1864, Conrad is ordered to Richmond. Lieutenant Lewis Bickford was ordered to map counties south of Washington for an escape route through which to carry Lincoln. Conrad met with Secretary of War Seddon, and then General Robert E. Lee met with Seddon. Conrad would make 3 trips to Washington, D.C. over the next few months. And then from September 12th to 15th, Conrad was back in Richmond, meeting with Confederate officials there. On September 15th, Colonel John S. Mosby and Lieutenant Charles K. Wood of the Signal Corps were ordered to work with Conrad. On September 17th, Secretary of State Judah Benjamin gave Conrad $400 in gold. Conrad then left for the northern neck of Virginia, the area between the Potomac and Rappahannock Rivers, a peninsula called the Northern Neck. Now again, under Benjamin is Albert Pike, Director of Covert Operations, a high-degree Mason and the head of the Illuminati in the United States. Conrad in Washington, D.C., observed the movements of Lincoln from a mansion near the president's house owned by a man named Ogle Talo. A pattern was observed in which Lincoln would take solitary rides to the soldiers' home on the outskirts of Washington. Kinsey Stewart, a relative of General Lee, through marriage, worked with Taylor in Washington, then was given $20,000 after meeting with Davis and Lee in Richmond. So you see that from the very beginning, Lee and Jefferson Davis, the President of the Confederacy, have knowledge and are aware of what's happening. Soldiers would be needed eventually to help. And in November of 1864, Lieutenant Bickford was ordered to Richmond. He was ordered to stop all mapping except for King William County south of Washington. An escape route had been decided. It would be through King William County. Now, soldiers would be needed to help the kidnappers and their hostage through Maryland and into Virginia. On November 5th, 250,000 was authorized by President Davis to send 1,500 soldiers for 6 months to be furloughed to the Northern Neck. You see, they couldn't just move them. You couldn't move a regiment of men, because then the Union soldiers, the Union spies would notice that and report it, that something's going on. 1,500 men have been switched to the Northern Neck. Why is that? So what they did is they just furloughed everybody, the whole army, and said, if you live in the Northern Neck, go home and join together there. So it's a few people from this regiment and that regiment, and you add them all up and you got 1,500. So it wasn't a massive movement of one army or one regiment or whatever. It was men from all over the army going to the Northern Neck. Now why do they need an army? Because when they kidnap Lincoln and bring him through King William County, he's going to be followed by a whole Union army. And so this was to protect the kidnappers, to protect them with an army. They would also mine the rivers and the streams that the Union Army may use to try to cut off the retreat. The Confederate government held great hope that President Lincoln would be defeated in the November election of 1864, and then none of this would be necessary. All Lincoln had to do was lose the election, and Lincoln pretty much thought that was a sure thing. Lincoln certainly expected that the Army would vote against him. George McLeod appealed to what were called the Copperhead Democrats, those who had sympathies to the South. And with the losses and the attrition that the Union Army was facing, they thought it was a good chance that Lincoln would lose. Lincoln even wrote down on a slip of paper his prediction of the outcome, which had him losing. But he didn't. In fact, he carried, I think, every state but two. And better than just one. And McLeod and his ideas were not approved by the American people. In January of 1865, Conrad and Mosby met in Richmond. Conrad was given more money personally approved by Jefferson Davis. In mid-January, Conrad and a half-dozen men waited on the road between the president's house and the soldiers' home. The time had come. They knew that Lincoln would take this route pretty much every day. He would ride alone, and they could grab him. On that day, he passed with an armed guard. Conrad made no attempt on the president. He accused soldiers who gathered at Surratt's Tavern, south of Washington, of leaking news of the planned kidnapping. Conrad reported back to Richmond, urged a change in plans, and abandoned his plot regarding Lincoln. In February, Confederates changed the key for their cipher messages, their code messages, from "come victory" to "come retribution." February 1865, marking a change in attitude. No longer is it, we're going to win, but if we can't win, we're going to make them pay. It is likely that at some point, Conrad had gained knowledge of another plot to kidnap Abraham Lincoln, a plot yet led by a young actor, John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth, 26 years old, young, athletic, from a famous family of actors. The Booths were from Maryland, and all Unionists except John. All loyal to Lincoln, all loyal to the Union cause and anti-slavery, even though they were from Maryland, except for John. In August of 1863, Booth was recruited to smuggle drugs to the Confederate soldiers. Now, we're not talking recreational here, it's medicinal drugs that he is trying to get into their hands. And when you're an actor and you're not suspected of anything, you pretty much have free run of the whole country. He makes no political statements. He's just out there, and so it's easy for him to smuggle needed supplies to the Confederates. I mean, he travels with his big theatrical trunk. He put whatever he wanted into it. And Booth does. His only real political statement was earlier, where he reportedly joined the well, anyway, he was at the hanging of John Brown. Yeah. All I think of was U.C. Riley, Harvard Brown. I want to go to PTA or something. Harper's Ferry, yes, he's there. John Wilkes Booth is at Harper's Ferry, dressed in a, well, it wasn't a Confederate uniform then, but the signing of those who were fighting John Brown. He was at the hanging of John Brown. Now, 3 Confederate agents were sent to Halifax, Canada, to coordinate operations there. Halifax became, and Montreal to some extent, the other government of the Confederacy. They established another government in the North, in Canada. This is one of the men who is in the Confederate Canadian headquarters. Jacob Thompson, Commissioner to Canada and a former U.S. Secretary of the Interior. This is George Sanders, former U.S. diplomat to European countries, including Italy. Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederacy, former U.S. Secretary of War. U.S. Secretary of War, Abraham Lincoln. Ulysses S. Grant. This is a picture of him about his presidential years. He was in his early 40s when the war was being fought. Thomas Conrad, the man sent in the first plot to Washington, the man who tried to kidnap Lincoln and found him nearby under guard and left him alone. John Mosby, the man that brought together the troops on the northern neck commanded them there, is known as the Gray Ghost of the Confederacy. Judah Benjamin. He's been Secretary of War, Secretary of State, and as my good friend Phyllis Kahn is proud to point out, the first high-ranking Jewish public official in either the Union or the Confederacy. Albert Pike, at the Illuminati, head of covert operations. John Wilkes Booth, called the most handsome man in America. Now, in June of 1864, George Sanders, attempted to organize a peace conference at Niagara Falls between Confederate officials and President Lincoln. Sanders had studied under Mazzini in Italy. Mazzini was the head of the Illuminati in Europe and advocated changing governments through assassination. They called it the theory of the dagger. Now, the purpose, and Sanders is also called the master spy of the Confederacy. His purpose in holding this peace conference at Niagara was simply to cast a bad light on Lincoln prior to the election, because he knew that Lincoln could not agree to peace on their terms. The Confederates who came actually were willing to say, okay, we'll stop fighting, just let us keep our slaves and keep going. And by this time of the war, Lincoln had passed beyond that. When he started, he said that his goal was to save the Union. And he would do it whether he could save one slave, all slaves, or no slaves. He would save the Union. But by this time, it's evolved to not just a war to preserve the Union, but a war to free the slaves. And so Lincoln can't make a peace agreement on the terms of the Confederates. There's only one thing he could do, and that was stop fighting, the war is over, the slaves are free. And that would not be agreed to by the Confederates. So Sanders knew it was doomed to fail, and Lincoln, he hoped, would look bad and lose the election, because this was still prior to the election. On July 26, 1864, a meeting was held at the Parker House in Boston. The register showed 3 people had come from Canada to meet at the Parker House with John Wilkes Booth. The hotel register is signed plainly, John Wilkes Booth, and 3 other men who obviously used aliases, and likely they were Sanders, Thompson, and Clay. In September, Booth, after this meeting, began to assemble conspirators. He met in Baltimore at the Barnum Hotel 2 of his childhood friends, Michael O'Laughlin and this man, Sam Arnold. Arnold and O'Laughlin had both been injured in the war, were not able to fight at this time, and Booth decided to interest them in his new project. He is going to kidnap Abraham Lincoln. They signed on to help Booth in this plan, and literally, Booth made them stand up, raise their right hand, and swear to him that they would be loyal to John Wilkes Booth and the Confederacy, probably in that order. On October 18th, Booth was in Montreal to St. Lawrence Hall, ostensibly to ship his theatrical wardrobe from Canada to the Confederate States where he was going to perform. He also met Confederate agents, and in Montreal he roomed next door for 10 days with George Sanders. The theory of the dagger was likely discussed. November 8th was Election Day. Booth and Conrad were both in Washington. Did they meet? We don't know. Likely they had, at some point, received information on the other. Booth began to travel to southern Maryland to meet with Confederate operatives. There's our friend George Sanders again. On November 13th, in Bryantown, Maryland, Booth met Dr. Samuel Mudd. Mudd's house and the Surratt Tavern were directly on a planned escape route from Washington. We'll talk more about Samuel Mudd as we go through this, but you may be familiar with his descendant, CBS newsman Roger Mudd. Roger Mudd is a direct descendant. And the expression, "your name is Mudd," actually is not about dirt, it's about him. From November 16th through December 12th, Booth was in New York City appearing in plays. He returned to Washington via Baltimore. In Baltimore, he gave to Arnold 2 7-shot Spencer carbines, 3 pistols, ammunition, daggers, and 2 sets of handcuffs. Arnold brought the weapons to Surrattsville and gave them to Mr. Lloyd at Surratt's Tavern to hide them. Now, the Surratt's Tavern was owned by Mary Surratt. She had run the tavern with her husband and her son John. Her husband had died. Mary Surratt determined she didn't want to continue running the boarding house, the tavern herself, and so she leased it to John Lloyd, went to Washington, and opened the Surratt boarding house. So she's a bit of an entrepreneur. She owned and leased a tavern and ran a boarding house. On December 21st, Booth was back in Bryantown with Mudd. Mudd introduced him to Tom Harbin, another Confederate agent, and they spent the night in Mudd's house. By the way, I'm saying a lot of names. There will not be a quiz. Don't worry about it. On December 23rd, Mudd and Harbin brought Booth to Surratt's boarding house in Washington to meet a recruiter, Confederate courier John Surratt. Surratt's mother, Mary, owned the boarding house and the tavern in Surrattsville. So, they're trying to build this group of conspirators. And so, Booth is put into contact with John Surratt, who knows a lot of people, and he's a courier. He gets around. They decided they needed more conspirators. And Harbin enlisted a German immigrant boatman named George Atzerodt to navigate the kidnapped party down rivers toward Richmond. So when they take Lincoln, they got to have a boatman to navigate the streams to go to Richmond. That's what Atzerodt's job will be. I'll go back. Ella Starr, she will have more of a role in this later on. Now, Ella Starr is a prostitute in Baltimore. That's her. But she has a different claim to fame. She's a good friend of John Wilkes Booth. And she will make an appearance in Washington. John Surratt. Here, this picture, he's in his Vatican garb. When Lincoln was killed, Surratt was on a mission in Canada, and he gets away. He goes to Italy and becomes a guard for the Pope. Another conspiracy theorist portion.
Was he a president before?
No, I don't think so. Harbin and Surratt go to John Mosby in the Northern Neck because it's been determined they need some muscle here. Abraham Lincoln is 6'4", 200 pounds. He's the rail splitter. He's a powerful man. Think John Surratt's going to take Lincoln? They need some muscle. So they asked Mosby, who can provide muscle for their group? He arranges them to meet Lewis Powell in Baltimore. Powell, 6'2", young, broad-shouldered, muscular. He is the muscle for the group. In Richmond, from January 25th to 26th, John Surratt meets with Secretary of War Judah Benjamin. And then on the way back to Washington, at the Surratt's Tavern in Surrattsville, he meets Davy Harold, a pharmacist clerk from Washington. He's known as a bird brain, not just because of his mental lightness, but also he loved to hunt birds. And that's what he was doing at Surrattsville. And so he is recruited to join. And the team is now complete. Booth, Surratt, Powell, Harold, Atzerodt, O'Laughlin, and Arnold. There's Atzerodt. Not the brightest bulb on the Christmas tree. Lewis Powell, the muscle. Davy Harold, the pharmacist clerk. A torpedo bureau was established in the Confederacy and was ordered by CSA officials to mine the rivers in the Northern Neck. Mosby and his men are ready to provide escort, and mining the rivers will hinder Union vessels attempting to halt Booth and his men. The Richmond leaders have a fallback position. Thomas Nelson Conrad is sent back to Washington, and Benjamin Stringfellow, the master spy of the Confederacy, is also sent to Washington on March 1st. And what are these guys going to do? Nelson, Conrad, and Stringfellow? Blow up the White House. That's their plan. O'Laughlin and Arnold are growing impatient. It's taken forever for Booth to actually act on anything. Booth, and they went back. O'Laughlin and Arnold went back to Baltimore. Booth sends a message to them. Don't fear to neglect your business. You had better come at once. Then he sends a message to Powell, who's in Baltimore. Go to Washington. Booth brought his co-conspirators to a play at Ford's Theater. They all gather, and Booth somehow thinks that they can do something theatrically here. And there are a couple of young girls that he brings in, and one I think is only about 12 years old, the other a teenager, but a bunch of guys sitting together watching a play at Ford's Theater would have looked strange in 1865. And so they had to have a couple of ladies there to make it look right. So they have a couple of young girls there. And as they watch from the box balcony seats, Booth plans his abduction of Lincoln. And then, after the play, the girls are sent back to their boarding house. The men gather for dinner, and Booth lays out his plan. He told them, here's what we're going to do. Somebody will dim the lights, Others of us will approach Lincoln from behind in his box, subdue him, lower him by rope to the stage floor, where others in the band would force him across the stage and out the backstage door. Sam Arnold says, "Are you crazy? I mean, that's not going to work. How are you going to carry out that in the middle of a crowded theater?" He says, "We signed up to capture a solitary man on a country road. This will never work." Then he said that O'Loughlin and he had jobs waiting in Baltimore, and if a sensible plan isn't carried out within a week, we're done with this. On March 4th, Abraham Lincoln gave his second presidential inauguration. This is the one where he talks about malice toward none, charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Let us bind up our nation's wounds, that famous speech. And watching the speech from the balcony above is Lewis Powell and John Wilkes Booth. Now, how did Booth get such a good spot to watch the inaugural? He'd been given a pass from Lucy Hale. Lucy Hale was Booth's fiancée and the daughter of a United States senator who was up to become the ambassador to Spain. And so, that was the in that he had. Makes you wonder why he brought Ella Starr to Washington when he was going to get married to Lucy Hale. By the way, Senator Hale didn't think much of this. Actors didn't have a real good reputation in those days. Not like today. Booth realized that his band was falling apart. He knew he must act. He promised action and called his men together to act on Lincoln. On March 17th, they waited on the road to the Soldiers' Home, but Lincoln changed his plans and didn't ride that day. And so, as Conrad before them, Booth's band comes up empty-handed as well. And so, O'Loughlin and Arnold quit the group and go back to Baltimore. On March 18th, Booth appears in a play for the last time. The Conrad Stringfellow plan to blow up the president's house continued. On April 1st, Booth learned of it. On April 5th, Richmond fell. It fell on April 3rd. Lincoln was there April 5th. He toured the ruins of the city. As he sits at President Davis's desk, he is informed of a plan to blow up his residence. He discounts it. A man named Ripley from the CSA Torpedo Bureau, anxious to see the end of the bloodshed, informs Lincoln's aides of the plan. They offer to bring Ripley to Lincoln. The president refuses to see him, saying, "Who would want to kill me?" Somebody could have said Ripley, believe it or not. But on April 4th, torpedo expert Thomas Harney reports to Mosby on the Northern Neck. He has been sent under Captain Baylor to get ordnance to Washington, meet with Stringfellow, who has the firing mechanism, and to blow up the White House. The plan is fully moved from abduction to murder. Then April 9th, Lee surrenders. On April 10th, Harney is captured by Union soldiers on the way to Washington. He never gets together with Stringfellow, and they never blow up the White House. On April 11th, Lincoln gives his last public speech. From his residence balcony, Lincoln urges the vote for black soldiers. Booth, watching with Powell, says that will be the last speech he ever gives. Booth has learned of the failure of the plan to bomb the president's house. He interprets that CSA officials have tried and failed to kill Lincoln, and that it is now up to him. Good Friday, April 14th. Booth visits Ford's Theater which he uses as a mailing address, and he learns that Lincoln had intended to go to a play at Grover's Theater, and now, because it is the last appearance of Laura Keene in the United States, that he is to attend Our American Cousin instead. And so, he begins to form a plan, which is right here, hiding from me. At 10 o'clock, John Wilkes Booth and Lucy Hale are having breakfast at Willard's Hotel, one of the fine hotels in Washington. They notice at a table nearby that President General Grant and his wife Julia are eating. And Julia will later remark that that Booth seemed very attentive, as if trying to hear what they were saying. Booth will go to Ford's Theater to pick up his mail. It's Good Friday. Mr. Ford is very excited because usually Good Friday is not a good day at the theater, but with the president coming and scratching his Grover's appearance, it's going to be a good box office night. And General Grant is going to be coming with him. Booth seizes on this as a real opportunity. And so, he begins to quickly put his plan together. He sits down on the steps and reads his mail. You don't know who the letters are from. He writes some responses down. And then Booth goes back in to Ford's Theater and he watches. And he plots. What is he going to do? He knows Our American Cousin, the play, very well. It's an English comedy, which, by the way, I saw in Litchfield on April 14th this year. Not a very good play. But anyway, I guess it was funnier in 1865. But he decides what he will do. And he knows that you got the big center aisle. Well, there's no center aisle. Everyone sits in the middle. There are two side aisles. And he walks on the side aisle. There's a door here. He knows that when he opens that door, the president's guard will be sitting there. He will then have to go up the stairs, open another door in a hallway, and there will be Lincoln. And there will be Grant. So what should he do? Well, he knows when he opens that first door, he's got to kill the guard. He's got a knife. So he'll have to do that. Now, he doesn't want people coming in after he shoots the president. So in the door there, he drilled a little hole so he can look through and watch. And then he chisels a wedge in the door, a little hole, and he has a bar that's going to wedge in there so that once he is in, that door can't be opened. So, that's on the first door. So, then he has to think, what would be the best time to shoot Lincoln? There's a line he knows in the third act where everyone is gone from the stage except for Harry Hawks, the male star of the play, and he'll be alone, and he will shout at the two women who have just insulted him, "I'll turn you inside out, old gal, you sock-dologizing old man-trap." Oh, that was a funny line. People would be laughing uproariously. Booth knew it. And so he knew that when they were laughing, it would be a great time for him to walk in and shoot. So he planned it out. He knows what he's going to do, but this is just part. He wants to decapitate the whole head of the government, not just the president this night. So, at 2 o'clock, Booth goes to Surratt's boarding house. He sends Mary Surratt to Surrattsville, the tavern, with a message for John Lloyd to have the weapons ready. He'll be coming. Then, Booth goes to the Herndon and sees Powell. Kirkwood is a hotel where Atzerodt stays. Now, the Kirkwood is a pretty fine place. Atzerodt, he wouldn't make a good impression there. He's definitely out of place. But for some reason, that's where Booth puts Atzerodt. Booth also sends Davy Harold off on a couple of errands. One, he wants him to visit Vice President Johnson, who stays at the also at the Kirkwood, and also Harold is to line up horses. Booth isn't sure if Davy Harold has got to Johnson or not. At one point, he decides he will go see Johnson. Now, you wonder how this can be. How does John Wilkes Booth just walk around seeing the vice president in his hotel room? For much of the war, Andrew Johnson had been the governor of Tennessee. He was the United States Senator, the only Southern United States Senator who did not leave the Union. And early in the war, Tennessee, which was the last state out into the war, becomes the first state to be subdued, generally by Union forces, and their capital, Nashville, taken, and their governor kicked out. And so Lincoln appoints Andrew Johnson to be the governor of Tennessee. And Booth, in doing plays in Nashville, frequently went out partying with Andrew Johnson. They were buddies. And so he goes to see Andrew Johnson. He is not there. Well, actually, first, Booth gives a message to the clerk that says, "Don't wish to disturb you. Are you at home?" And Johnson was not at home. Then he sits down in the foyer, Booth does, of the Kirkwood, and he writes a letter. The letter is to be given to the newspaper. And he explains, apparently, everything he's doing. Now, he doesn't want the paper to get this too soon. And when he gets out on his horse, which he has just rented, Harold got his own horse, now Booth got a horse, and as he goes out to get his horse, he sees another actor named John Matthews walking across the street. Booth didn't really like Matthews, but he calls him over. And he says, "I have a letter here for you. Will you give this tomorrow to the newspaper? Don't look at it, don't read it, just tomorrow. Hand it to the newspaper." And then Matthews takes it, goes away. Booth then turns and he sees a figure that he thinks he identified. And so the carriage goes by him. Booth turns his horse, gallops down the street to look more carefully. Who is it? Yes, it is. It's Ulysses Grant and his wife Julia. And Booth goes back to the porter at the railroad and says, "Where are they going?" And he's told they just bought tickets to go on the train to New Jersey. Booth is upset. Now what's he going to do? He planned to kill Grant that night. Now, what's happening with the party? Let's go back to Lincoln a little bit now. Abraham Lincoln started the day as he normally did, a light breakfast, saw some people in his office, had a cabinet meeting, where he told them of a strange dream he had had, in which he woke up to hearing sobbing in the White House, and went down and saw a casket with a Union guard standing by it, and he said, "Who has been killed in the White House?" "In the President's house." And the guard said, "The President." He was shot by himself. So he tells the cabinet that. Later, after talking to the cabinet about his reconstruction plans, letting the South up easy, later on, he will call in Vice President Johnson to speak with him. This is the first time that he has seen Johnson in over a month. On March 4th, Andrew Johnson has been a national disgrace when he appeared drunk at the inaugural. His speech, he was obviously out of it, and Lincoln was embarrassed and said, "Don't let him speak again anyway." But he talks to him this day, goes through his plans and what he thinks should be done. And then Lincoln goes to the Secretary of War, to Stanton, and says, he tells him that Grant has canceled on us. He's not going to go. His wife wants to go see their children in New Jersey. Actually, she hated Mary Lincoln, and that's why she wanted to go. She would have gone anywhere to get away from Mary Lincoln. And Lincoln says, "Will you go with me?" Secretary Stanton. He says, "No, I can't. I'm too busy." So the theater party's not doing very well. He says, "How about Major Eckert here? Can you come with and be my guard? I've seen him break a poker over his arm 5 times. He's a strong man. Can I take him with me?" Stanton says, "No, you can't. I need him to work late tonight." And so poking a little jab at Stanton, Lincoln says, "Come on, Eckert, you really have to work late tonight? Can't you come out with the President?" And he says, "Not want to get in hot water with Stanton." No, I got to work." Stanton says, "I have to work." As it was, Stanton sent him home early that night. They will manage to find a young Army major, Rathbone, and his wife and his fiancée, Clara Harris, and they agreed to go with the Lincolns to the party at the theater. Lincoln then goes for a carriage ride with Mrs. Lincoln. And it's like a great burden has been lifted from him that night, because he talks to her about all kinds of things, about what they want to do, what he wants to do when it's all over. He says, "You and I have been very miserable lately. I'd love to go to the Holy Land. I'd like to see California. I've never been to California." He also never made it to Minnesota, but that's another story. But Lincoln is very ebullient. He likes the theater, by the way. The theater is how he kind of puts this war behind him. At least for a few hours a night, he can get it out of his head, what has happened. And so, Lincoln's night is all set up. Now, Davy Harold is supposed to see Johnson to get passes to cross the Navy Yard Bridge, will be used as an escape route. No crossing of the bridge had currently been permitted after 9 o'clock without a pass. Now, about 8 o'clock that night, Booth's band meets in a room at the Herndon. Before that, though, about 6 o'clock, Booth went to his hotel, the National, and placed incriminating letters in his trunk that he'd received from Arnold and O'Loughlin. he had his own brand of retribution going. O'Loughlin and Arnold had left him, and he was going to see that people knew that they had a part in this. And so he leaves their letters in which they say, we were in this to kidnap, but not to kill him. And they're put in Booth's trunk. Harold meets with Atzerodt in George Atzerodt's room in the Herndon. And Davy Harold places a coat containing Booth's bank book, a knife, and a pistol in Atzerodt's room. And then they leave, and Atzerodt locks the door. At 8 o'clock, the band meets in a room in the Herndon. Booth lays out the new plan to disrupt the government through the assassination of 3 leaders. He tells Atzerodt to go to Vice President Johnson's room and kill him. Lewis Powell is to go to Secretary of State Seward's residence and kill him. Booth announces he will kill Lincoln himself at Ford's Theater. Atzerodt adamantly refuses to obey Booth. He says, I'm a boatman, not a killer. And he leaves Booth with disgust. Booth then asks Harold to kill Johnson. See, he's down a killer. Surratt's in Canada, and there's another guy that he thought could help, but his name is Donaldson, and this guy will turn up on the train carrying Grant. Months later, Grant gets a message from someone who writes, I was on the train to kill you, and I'm glad I didn't. So, Powell is briefed by Harold about the interior layout of Seward's home. He leaves. Seward has been hurt in a carriage accident. He's got bands around his chest. He's invalid. He's in bed. He can't get out. And so Davy Harold's pharmacist has been giving drugs. And Davy Harold's been going there giving drugs to Seward. He says to Powell, go there, say you've come from Dr. Verde, and you have drugs, and they've been ordered to give to Seward tonight. That will get you into the house. And then it's all set. They're all ready to go. Booth has already dressed for the occasion. Put on his best suit. He's got a single-shot Derringer. He has a knife. He's ready to go. Harold rushes to Atzerodt's room to get his gun. Door's locked. Atzerodt's gone. Davy Harold can't get the gun to kill Johnson. And so he decides to go help Powell. He holds a horse while Powell goes into Seward's house. The butler at the door says, you can't go in, come back tomorrow. It's late. It's nearly 10 o'clock. Powell insists, I have to give, Dr. Verde says I must give them, this is very important. The butler says that Seward is sleeping, you can't disturb him. Powell goes to the top of the stairs where he's met by Frederick Seward, William Seward's son. Says, you can't go in. He knocks on the door. Fanny Seward, the president's young daughter, sticks her head out and says, the secretary's almost asleep. Powell turns, starts to walk down the stairs, and then turns, charges into Seward, knocks the butler out of the way, takes his pistol, pulls the trigger, and it clicks and fires. So he takes the pistol and smashes it over Seward's head. Then he goes into the room. There's a guard, a male nurse, sitting by the bed. He slugs him. He pushes Fanny Seward out of the way. He takes the pistol. He points it at Seward. He pulls the trigger. Click. Not even a click. He broke the gun on Frederick Seward's head. Won't work. So he takes his knife and he begins to slash and slash and slash. And Seward has all these metal bands covering him because of the carriage accident, and he keeps hitting the metal band. He does slice Seward's cheek. scar that he'll have the rest of his life. Augustus Seward, the other son, bursts into the room and fights Powell. Also, the nurse gets up and starts to fight, and not a bloody mess. Augustus Seward loses half of his scalp to the knife. Many blows are received by the nurse. Meanwhile, the butler is screaming, "Murder! Murder! Murder!" Outside, there's Davy Harold holding the horse. He listens, and he goes, "I'm getting out of here." And he rides away. Powell will run down the stairs into the street yelling, "Madman! Madman! Madman!" And where's my horse? So that's what's going on at Seward. Meanwhile, 10:15. A little earlier. Booth is in the tavern next to Ford's Theater. He's waiting for that time in the third act. He walks around. He comes in and he sees John Matthews sitting there, the actor he gave the letter to. He sees the president's guard, John Parker, sitting there. Should have been guarding the president. He walks by a man who says, "You ain't half the actor your father was." And Booth says, "Come to Ford's for the third act. There'll be some fine acting there tonight." And then he walks across the street. He walks in. He opens the door. No guard. He walks in. He takes the bar, jams it in. They can't open the door. He goes upstairs. He looks to the peephole. And he waits. And then the line comes. "I'll turn you inside out, old gal. You stocked out, I no matter." People laugh. He walks in, comes within a couple feet of the president, and pulls the trigger of a single shot Derringer. The bullet enters behind Lincoln's left ear, lodges behind his right eye. Next, Rathbone shot, jumps up and comes at Booth, who takes his knife and slashes Rathbone's arm. Then he stands on the balcony and jumps to the stage floor about 10 feet down. His spurs catch in the bunting on the theater box, the balcony box, and he falls heavily. He then stands, holds the knife high, and yells, Sic semper tyrannis, death to tyrants. And then he goes through the actors, through the backstage. He's still slashing away. There are people who, no one is injured, but there are a couple of people who have their clothing, their coats sliced. He had talked to a man at 6 o'clock that day, Ed Spangler, stagehand, about holding the horse. Well, Spangler gave the duty off to a guy named Charlie Peanuts, because why would he hold the horse? So Charlie Peanuts hands the horse, and Booth rides away. He meets up with Davy Harold. They each present signed passes with an 80-yard bridge. They identify themselves as John Wilkes Booth and Davy Harold, and they ride over the bridge where Booth expects to achieve acclaim and glory as the killer of Abraham Lincoln. Well, that doesn't turn out so well for him. Meanwhile, after Booth had escaped from Ford's, his cry was heard throughout the theater. This is Lincoln, Mary Lincoln, shouting, "They've killed the president! They've killed the president!" They? How could you do it? John Wilkes Booth, how could you be so prescient as to say they? That night, after Lincoln has been shot, the town gathers at the Peterson boarding house across the street from Lincoln's front. Mary Lincoln is there. People are gathering. Stanton realizes, we got to get Andrew Johnson here. And so they go to see the vice president. They open the door, and there's Johnson in his night people just feel Ella Starr. The woman from Baltimore. You see, if you're going to kill the vice president, you want to make sure you keep him in his room that night. Apparently, brought in Ella Starr to keep the vice president occupied so that Atzerodt, Katie Harold, is killed. They bring Johnson to the Peterson boarding house. Stanton and Johnson have a conversation, and then Mrs. Lincoln finds out that Johnson is there and screams and orders him. She hated him. But here is something that was probably very likely considered that night. How could Booth have crossed the Navy Yard Bridge? Who signed the pass? The guard who let them go across was never seen again. And all speculation is that Andrew Johnson signed the pass to allow Booth to escape. I mean, obviously he signed it before the shooting, but this was the great secret never revealed. Why? Can you imagine the state of the country just rebounding, just really in the very end of a war, if the leader of the country was killed and the man who would benefit the most and become the next president was implicated in aiding the assassin to escape? It could have torn apart the country. And so it is a great secret that was never revealed.
Why would you want to do that? Did he have other difficulties?
No, Booth was his buddy. Remember, he didn't know. He didn't know that Booth was going to do this. They had partied together in Nashville. He just thought he was doing a favor for a friend. But that's not how it would have been received by the public. And so what happens, real quick now, because I've already talked longer than I'm going to. Booth, a couple weeks later, with Davy Harold, is cornered in a tobacco barn in Virginia. He is extremely distraught that he didn't receive all the help and attention he thought he was going to get. He's shot, carried out of the barn, dying, looks up at his hand and says, useless. Davy Harold is captured. He'll stand trial. They go to, they knew that people had been in Mary Surratt's. They had certain accusations against her. They go to the boarding house while they are arresting Mary Surratt. Who happens by? Howell. He said, who are you? I'm a workman. Just came here to fix the gutters. Mary Surratt said, oh no, he isn't. Booth's friend. So they take him. Atzerodt might have got away. But Atzerodt, in drinking a little bit too much, overheard somebody saying how the assassination was carried out, and Atzerodt said to a crowded group, oh, I know better than that. Let me tell you what happened. So they arrested Atzerodt. And eventually, 4 will hang for the crime. Atzerodt, Howell. Who says, by the way, that we don't the gallows. You ain't got the half of it. Surratt and Harold. No, not Surratt. Atzerodt and Harold. Before they hang. 4 others will be sent to prison. Waltham, Arnold, Bangwood, Mudd, Booth. In his path, in his fall, or later on a horse, we don't know which for sure, likely broke his ankle and stopped dead at the head by Dr. Samuel Mudd. And then there's this other little story that it wasn't Booth at all. There was another actor, John W. Boyd. Both Boyd and Booth had tattoos on their wrists, J.W. Boyd acted as a building every now and then for Booth. And there are those who also believe that Elvis is But I will say this. 20 years later, now maybe 10, Albert Pike was in San Antonio, Texas. He's there, Fort Worth, Texas, with Temple Houston, son of Sam Houston. And they're at a bar drinking, and sitting at a table, and Temple Houston related this. He looked up, and he saw Pike quivering. And he said he turned a pasty white. And he pointed to a man at the bar and said, "It's John Will's food." The man at the bar turned, gave a little salute, and walked out the door. Now, those are just speculations. You know, I told you a whole bunch of stuff. Now, if you want to distill it down to just a couple points, that's it. There were at least 2 plots going on to kidnap or kill the President of the United States. And the Confederate officials, including Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee, knew about it. And in the end, they were successful. Do you have any questions? Okay, you can clap. My legacy building. Any questions? Yes.
How many years after all of this did we start to hear about all of this? You know, I mean, you obviously researched it, you put it together, but...
Yeah, and that thing about about Johnson signing, I didn't run across that until I was actually doing my research. No.
I mean, we hear the same thing about John F. Kennedy.
Well, everybody. I mean,
So,
they were joking about Elvis, but
sometime, 50 years from now, what story are we going to hear about all of that?
yeah, maybe we'll finally know when they finally open the records. But, you know, and the thing, there's such similarities. Because, again, the 18 pages out of the diary that are forever lost. And there are other things, too, that Stanton is confiscated. Now, first of all, Stanton will defend himself by saying, Washington was a southern town. I didn't want Lincoln to go to Ford's Theater. That's why I said Eckert to the garden. That's why I wouldn't go. I was trying to dissuade him from going to the theater. And, you know, it's we'll never know for sure what really happened.
Why wasn't there more security in those days?
They didn't have the Secret Service then.
There were always people that want to kill the president.
They had a couple guards. And Lincoln was very fatalistic. You know, Lincoln said, if somebody wants to kill me, they will. We can't stop it. If somebody wants to kill the President of the United States in this country, they can do it. The guard, by the way, the better of the guards, was there that night waiting for Parker. Parker was late showing up, and so the better guard almost went with. He told Lincoln he should go, and Lincoln said, "Now Parker's showing, let him go." So, yes.
You said that several people were either executed or incarcerated for the crime, but was any of that a matter of public record, or was there any public knowledge at that time about what?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And it sort of faded from history and has been since.
Not really. The four that were executed, that was a public trial, but it was not a public trial in the sense of, you know, they were tried by the military. It was a military court, and they were hanged in the old prison yard in Washington. The other four were sent to prison in the dry Tortugas, and there was a yellow fever epidemic, and Samuel Mudd did marvels in saving people's lives. And so when it was over, and the epidemic was over, they freed Dr. Mudd. Olapa died there, and Arnold and Spangler, the guy who was supposed to hold the horse. Someone else went through and they let them go. John Surratt. By the way, I forgot some people. I always forget this. John Surratt came back and became a speaker on the assassination. He became a public speaker. I forget. There's Lucy Hale, Booth's fiance. By the way, when Booth's body was brought back, a woman, heavily veiled, uncovered the body and then screamed, fainted. A man cut off a lock of Booth's hair and stuck it in her hand. Lee, Mary Surratt, Johnson, William Seward. Booth is up in the balcony there. The Navy Yard Bridge, there's the bridge. Oh, I could use this. There's the bridge. The escape route. Garrett's barn, I don't know where it is there. This is the man who shot John Wilkes Booth, Thomas Corbett. Thomas Corbett will die in the Hinckley Fire in Minnesota.
How did he get to Minnesota? Why?
I don't know why he came to Minnesota. Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War. The hangings, there's Mary Surratt. Harold Nat Surratt. Johnson. That's that. So, if anyone is interested in any books, they're $15. And you'd love them.
And before everyone takes off, I'll just have you pick our door prize winner for tonight.
A door prize. Hope it wasn't that. You'll have to read it.
Pat Walsh.
See?
Congratulations. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Did you ever hear of Police Star?